All right, so we're back, and looks like we're diving into some Canadian National Railway this time.
Yeah, CN.
Yeah, their performance in 2024.
Yeah.
We've got a whole stack of their financial reports,
Right.
but the one we're going to focus on today is Q4 2024 Financial Presentation-N.PDF.
Okay.
And looks like CN faced some hurdles in 2024, huh?
It wasn't a smooth ride for CN in 2024.
Like labor disruptions and wild weather and all those ongoing port issues.
Yeah, they really got hit by a series of challenges, it seems like.
Yeah.
We're talking about protracted labor and port uncertainties and a softer economic environment overall and just fluctuating fuel prices.
Yeah, I see all those numbers in the report.
Yeah, all these factors impacted their bottom line when you look at things like earnings per share and their operating ratio.
Right. So before we dive into the specifics of all that,
Hmm.
I'm wondering if you could just help us understand why are these challenges so impactful for a company like CN?
Sure. So just imagine CN as the circulatory system of North American commerce. So they move a vast amount of goods across the continent, everything from raw materials to finished products.
Yeah.
And so when you have disruptions like labor strikes or port congestion, it's like a ripple effect through the supply chain.
Oh,
So goods get delayed, costs increase, and it can impact businesses and consumers alike.
so it's not just about CN's internal operations. It's really about their role in a much larger network.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to understand how these external factors influence their performance.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into some of the specifics here.
Okay.
The report mentions something called car velocity, averaging around 210 miles per day for the year.
Right.
Can you just explain what that means?
So car velocity is basically how quickly freight cars are moving across CN's rail network. So just think of it as the average speed of their operation.
Okay.
So the higher the velocity, the more efficiently they're moving goods.
All right, 210 miles a day. So that's
Right. So that gives us a sense of their overall operational efficiency throughout the year.
okay, cool. They also highlight a 94% local service commitment.
Right.
What's that all about?
So local service commitment refers to the percentage of cars that are successfully delivered on time each day.
Okay,
So it's a measure of reliability, like are they meeting those delivery commitments?
gotcha.
94% indicates that even with all those challenges, they were still able to maintain a pretty high level of service.
So it seems like even with all these disruptions, CN managed to keep things moving relatively smoothly.
Yeah, they showed real resilience bouncing back from those disruptions.
Okay.
But the report does highlight that the early onset of winter in Q4 of 2024 did have an impact.
What kind of impact did that have?
Well, the early winter had cascading effects.
Okay.
It limited their ability to get capital work done, meaning fewer capital credits.
Hmm.
They also saw an increase in unproductive labor costs and higher expenses related to just winter weather like snow removal.
So it sounds like Q4 was a pretty difficult period. But I'm curious, even with all these challenges, were there any areas where CN actually saw growth or positive momentum?
There were definitely some bright spots. Even with the disruptions, CN experienced strong demand in a few key areas.
Like what?
Frac sand, refined fuels, propane exports, and grain.
Interesting. What was driving that demand, especially in the frac sand market?
So the demand for frac sand is tied to oil and gas.
Okay.
It's a key component in hydraulic fracturing or fracking, and it's used to extract oil and gas from shale rock.
Right.
So increased demand suggests a resurgence in oil and gas production, which in turn benefits CN as they transport that frac sand to the production sites.
So CN is benefiting from the ripple effect of increased activity in another industry.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
all very interconnected.
It is, and it's not just about volume. CN also managed to maintain pricing power, meaning they were able to charge more for their services without costs going too high.
Okay.
And this is all supported by their strong customer service, which helps them retain those key relationships even when there are disruptions.
I see here that they even saw 12% RTM growth in the first 4 weeks of 2025.
Right.
Can you explain what that means?
So RTM stands for revenue ton miles, and it's essentially a measure of freight volume. It tells you how many tons of freight were moved, how many miles.
Well,
So a 12% increase in RTM means they're moving significantly more goods compared to the same period last year.
so that suggests some positive momentum is carrying forward.
It does.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we've got challenges in 2024, but also signs of growth and resilience.
Yeah.
Anything else our listeners should know about their performance in 2024 before we move on?
I think we've covered the key points. They faced external shocks, but demonstrated resilience in their operations and saw demand growth in certain sectors.
Okay.
It was a year of navigating uncertainty, but they emerged in a solid position to build from.
Great. So with that foundation laid, let's shift gears and explore what's next for CNM. How are they positioning themselves for success in 2025 and beyond?
Well, they've outlined a few key initiatives.
Okay.
One is plan discipline and right-size resources, which boils down to aligning resources with their goals and ensuring they can recover quickly from disruptions.
Okay.
It's about having the right resources in the right place at the right time, whether that's locomotives, personnel, or track maintenance equipment.
Okay.
This way, they're better prepared to handle unforeseen events and keep things running smoothly.
That sounds crucial in an industry where unexpected delays can have such a big impact.
It is.
What does right-sizing actually look like?
So it's about optimizing their workforce and assets.
Okay.
For example, they're seeing a 7% improvement in Q4 GTMs per train and engine employee compared to the previous quarter.
GTMs, that sounds pretty technical. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, GTMs, or gross ton miles, are a standard way to measure the volume of freight traffic. It considers both the weight of the freight and the distance transported.
Right.
So an improvement in GTMs per employee indicates that they're moving more freight with the same amount of labor.
So more efficiency from the workforce.
Exactly, a key indicator of increased efficiency.
What other ways is CN right-sizing?
They're also focusing on asset utilization, making sure their locomotives and equipment are being used effectively.
Okay.
For example, they've seen a 6% increase in tie gang productivity in 2024 compared to 2023.
Tie gang, what's a tie gang?
So tie gangs are the crews responsible for replacing railroad ties.
No.
A critical aspect of maintaining the tracks, so a productivity increase there means they're able to maintain more track with the same amount of resources.
So working smarter, not harder.
Exactly, getting more out of the existing resources.
What's the other major initiative?
The other big one is driving efficiencies throughout their operations.
Okay.
This covers a wide range of efforts from improving locomotive reliability to enhancing engineering productivity and reducing costly failures.
I imagine that's a constant challenge
It is.
with such a huge network.
It starts with things like preventative maintenance and proactive repairs for the locomotives, which reduces the likelihood of breakdowns that could disrupt the entire system. They're also implementing technologies to optimize routes and predict potential issues and even automate certain tasks.
Oh, wow.
It's a combination of human expertise and technological advancements working together.
And all these improvements in efficiency translate to cost savings,
Exactly.
which is good for their bottom line and investors.
Right, and that's reflected in their financial projections for 2025. They're projecting 10% to 15% adjusted diluted EPS growth over 2024.
Okay.
Now, they are being somewhat conservative with their overall volume growth assumptions because of modest overall economic growth,
Right.
but they seem confident in their ability to leverage those efficiency gains for profit growth.
So they're projecting good EPS growth even while acknowledging some economic uncertainties.
Yeah.
What about capital expenditures? Are they planning any major investments in 2025?
Their CapEx for 2025 is set at $3.4 billion.
Okay.
Interestingly, that's actually $100 million less than the previous year, even with inflationary pressures and foreign exchange headwinds.
So they're tightening the belt a little bit even with cost pressures.
Yeah, they're being very strategic about where they allocate capital.
Okay.
They're prioritizing projects that will have the biggest impact on their long-term goals. So things like enhancing their network capacity, improving efficiency, and driving future growth.
It's less about cutting back and more about spending wisely.
Exactly.
So it's a disciplined approach to capital allocation.
Yeah, focusing on those high-impact investments.
What about returning value to shareholders?
Right.
We already talked about the 5% dividend growth, but what about share buybacks?
Right. They're also planning share buybacks, which can be a way to return value to shareholders, especially if they think their shares are undervalued.
And remind me, what's the logic behind share buybacks?
So essentially, they're using their own funds to purchase their own shares from the open market. By reducing the number of outstanding shares, they can increase earnings per share, making the remaining shares more valuable.
Okay.
It also signals confidence in their own future prospects, so they believe their shares are a good investment.
So they're not just focused on internal operations, they're thinking about how to maximize value for their investors.
Exactly.
So we've got a company prioritizing efficiency, strategic investments, shareholder returns. What else can we glean from this report about their approach to business?
Let's talk about revenue breakdown.
Okay.
Understanding where their revenue comes from gives us a better picture of their strengths and potential vulnerabilities.
What are the key segments?
So their revenue is primarily generated from three segments: intermodal, bulk, and merchandise.
Let's start with intermodal. What exactly falls under that category?
Intermodal refers to the transportation of goods using multiple modes of transportation, primarily rail and truck.
Okay.
You know those large shipping containers you see being moved on trains?
Uh-huh.
They can easily be transferred to trucks for the final leg of the journey.
So it's about seamless connectivity across the network.
Right.
Okay. Why is this segment so significant for CN?
Intermodal is actually their largest revenue segment, and for good reason. It taps into the growth of global trade and the increasing demand for efficient transportation solutions.
Gotcha.
And CN is well positioned to capitalize on these trends because they have a vast rail network and strong partnerships with trucking companies.
So they're bridging the gap between rail and road.
Exactly. They're creating a more efficient and integrated transportation system.
And it's not just about containers. Their intermodal segment also includes automotive transport.
Right, although that's facing some headwinds right now because of the cyclical nature of the auto industry.
Right. We talked earlier about how that dealer restocking in the first half of 2024 is making some tough comparisons.
Right.
But overall, it sounds like their intermodal segment is a key driver of their growth.
It is.
What about the bulk segment?
So the bulk segment includes commodities like grain, coal, and fertilizers.
Okay.
These are typically transported in large quantities over long distances, making rail the ideal mode of transportation.
So that's where those grain markets we mentioned earlier come into play.
You got it. CN plays a vital role in transporting grain from Canada and the U.S. to ports and markets around the world.
It sounds like a pretty stable source of revenue people always need to eat.
Exactly. And the global demand for grain is only going to increase as the world's population grows.
That's a good point.
So CN is well positioned to benefit from that long-term trend.
So we've got intermodal, driven by global trade,
Right.
and bulk, which benefits from the demand for agricultural products.
Right.
What about the merchandise segment?
The merchandise segment is actually their most diverse. It encompasses a wide range of goods, from forest products and chemicals to plastics, metals, and minerals.
So it's like a catch-all category.
It is.
What's the advantage of having such a diverse segment?
So it gives them exposure to a wide range of industries, which helps to balance out any fluctuations in specific markets.
Okay.
So if one industry is experiencing a downturn, they can potentially offset those losses with growth in other sectors.
So it's a risk mitigation strategy.
Exactly. It adds a layer of stability to their overall revenue.
Okay, so intermodal, bulk, and merchandise, a pretty solid foundation for growth.
Yeah.
But they're not immune to challenges, are they?
You're right. No business is immune to challenges. The rail industry is very competitive.
Yeah.
And CN faces pressure to keep costs down and improve service. And we can't forget about those external factors we discussed earlier: economic volatility, geopolitical risks, and the threat of labor disruptions.
Right.
These are things investors need to keep in mind.
Of course. But overall, it sounds like CN's in a pretty good position.
Yeah.
Diversified business model, clear focus on efficiency and growth, and they're being strategic about capital allocation.
They are.
But I feel like there's more to uncover. What else can we glean from this report about the factors that will shape CN's future?
Well, one crucial aspect we haven't really talked about is their focus on sustainability.
Okay.
In today's world, environmental responsibility is a business imperative.
It is. That's a great point. So how is CN approaching sustainability? What kind of initiatives are they undertaking?
While this particular report doesn't go super in-depth into their specific sustainability programs, it does highlight their commitment to managing their environmental footprint.
Okay.
They're investing in fuel-saving technologies, exploring alternative fuels, and working to reduce emissions.
Makes sense. I mean, the rail industry plays a big role in reducing emissions. I mean, moving freight by rail is much more fuel efficient than trucking, right?
It is, and CN has been recognized for their efforts in this area.
Okay.
They've set some ambitious targets for reducing their carbon footprint and improving their environmental performance.
So they're being proactive.
They are. They recognize that sustainability is not just about doing the right thing, it's also good for business.
Right. Investors and customers are increasingly looking for companies that are committed to environmental responsibility.
Absolutely.
And for a company like CN, which relies on natural resources and operates within communities across the continent, sustainability is essential.
It is.
So they're minimizing their impact while also being a leader in sustainable transportation.
Right.
Are there any other internal factors that could influence their performance in the years ahead?
Well, one area they highlight in the report is the need to attract and retain top talent.
Okay.
The rail industry, like many others, is facing a skilled labor shortage.
Right.
And CN needs to ensure they can find and keep the best employees to stay competitive.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have all these plans, but you need the right people to execute them?
Exactly.
What are they doing to address this?
So they're investing in employee training and development programs, they're offering competitive compensation packages, and they're creating a work environment that fosters career growth and advancement.
Okay.
They're also focused on building a more diverse and inclusive workforce because talent comes from all walks of life.
So it's about company culture,
Yeah,
attracting and retaining the best in the industry.
it is. And it's more than just filling positions.
Right.
It's about having the right people with the right skills at the right time.
Got it.
And that actually goes back to their focus on planned discipline and right-sized resources.
Right.
It's not just about having enough employees, it's about having the right mix of skills and experience to meet the needs of the business.
Yeah.
It's about anticipating future challenges and preparing their workforce to adapt.
Okay, so we've got a company focused on operational efficiency, strategic investments, shareholder returns, environmental sustainability, and developing their workforce.
Yeah.
It's a very holistic approach,
It is.
recognizing that success depends on getting all these elements right.
Right.
Anything else we should consider?
Well, one thing that stands out is their emphasis on stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
They're not just focused on their own internal operations. They're engaging with communities along their rail lines, building partnerships and addressing concerns.
Why is that so important for a company like CN?
Well, think about it. Their rail network stretches across thousands of miles, passing through tons of towns and cities.
Yeah.
And their operations have a direct impact on those communities. So it's important to build relationships and address potential issues proactively. It's about being a good neighbor, showing that they're invested in those communities.
It sounds like they're taking a long-term view, recognizing that their success is tied to the communities they serve.
Exactly. And that's an important takeaway from this report.
Okay.
CN is not just focused on maximizing profits, they're building a sustainable and responsible company.
That's a great perspective.
Thanks.
We've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored their financial performance, their strategic initiatives, their revenue breakdown, their focus on sustainability, their efforts to develop their workforce, their commitment to stakeholder engagement.
Yeah.
Is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they continue to follow CN's journey?
I think the key takeaway is that CN is a company that is constantly evolving and adapting.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to embrace innovation or challenge the status quo, and they're making bold decisions to position themselves for long-term success.
What's the one question you'd like to leave our listener or do something to ponder as they continue to explore CN's story?
Given their focus on resource alignment, efficiency, and technological innovation, how might advancements in automation and AI reshape the rail industry in the coming years?
That's a great question.
How will CN leverage these technologies to further enhance operations, improve safety, and create a more sustainable future for rail transportation?
It's clear that the rail industry is on the cusp of major transformations, and CN is at the forefront.
They're also planning share buybacks,
Right, share buybacks.
which can be a way to return value to shareholders.
Right, especially if they think their shares are undervalued.
Right.
So remind me the logic behind share buybacks. What is that?
Well, they're essentially using their own funds to purchase their own shares from the open market. So by reducing the number of outstanding shares, they increase earnings per share. And that makes the remaining shares more valuable.
Okay, and it also signals confidence in the company.
It does. It shows that they believe their shares are a good investment.
So they're not just focused on internal operations, they're also thinking about how to maximize value for their investors.
Exactly.
So we've got a company that is prioritizing efficiency, strategic investments, shareholder returns. What else can we learn from this report about how they think about business?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about their revenue breakdown.
Okay.
Understanding where their revenue comes from can give us a better picture of their strengths and potential vulnerabilities.
Okay, revenue breakdown. What are the key segments we should be looking at here?
So their revenue is primarily generated from three segments: intermodal, bulk, and merchandise.
Okay, let's start with intermodal. What exactly falls under that category?
Intermodal refers to the transportation of goods using multiple modes of transportation,
Okay.
primarily rail and truck.
Okay, so like those big shipping containers you see being moved on trains.
Exactly. And those containers can easily be transferred to trucks for the final leg of the journey.
So it's about seamless connectivity across the transportation network.
It is.
Okay, why is this segment so significant for CN?
Well, intermodal is their largest revenue segment,
Okay,
and it taps into the growth of global trade and the increasing demand for efficient and reliable transportation solutions.
gotcha.
And CN is really well positioned to capitalize on these trends. They have a vast rail network and strong partnerships with trucking companies.
So they're bridging the gap between rail and road, creating a more efficient integrated system.
Exactly.
And it's not just containers, right? Their intermodal segment also includes automotive transport.
Right. Although that segment is facing some headwinds right now due to the cyclical nature of the auto industry.
Right. We talked earlier about how that dealer restocking in the first half of 2024 is creating some tough comparisons.
Right.
But overall, it sounds like their intermodal segment is a key driver of their growth strategy.
It is.
Okay, so what about the bulk segment? What's that all about?
The bulk segment includes commodities like grain, coal, and fertilizers.
Okay.
These are typically transported in large quantities over long distances, which makes rail the ideal mode of transportation.
Right, so this is where those grain markets we mentioned earlier come into play.
CN plays a vital role in transporting grain from the agricultural heartland of Canada and the U.S. to ports and markets around the world.
So it sounds like a pretty stable source of revenue.
It is.
People always need to eat.
Exactly. And the global demand for grain is only going to increase as the world population grows.
Right, so CN is well positioned to benefit from that long-term trend.
They are?
Okay, so we've got intermodal driven by global trade
Right.
and bulk, which benefits from the demand for agricultural products.
Yeah.
What about that third piece of the pie, the merchandise segment?
So the merchandise segment is actually their most diverse.
Yeah.
It includes a really wide range of goods, everything from forest products and chemicals to plastics, metals, and minerals.
So it's like a catch-all category for everything else.
Yeah, it is.
What's the advantage of having such a diverse segment?
Well, it gives them exposure to a wide range of industries, and that helps to balance out any fluctuations in specific markets.
Okay.
So if one industry is experiencing a downturn, they can potentially offset those losses with growth in other sectors.
Right, so it's a risk mitigation strategy.
Exactly. It adds
Yeah.
a layer of stability to their overall revenue stream.
Okay, so to recap, intermodal, their largest segment driven by global trade.
Right.
Bulk, which benefits from the steady demand for those agricultural products.
Yep.
And then merchandise, their most diverse segment, giving them exposure to lots of different industries.
Right.
That sounds like a pretty solid foundation for growth.
It is.
But of course, they're not immune to challenges, are they?
You're right. No business is immune to challenges, and the rail industry is a very competitive one.
Yeah.
CN faces constant pressure to keep costs down and improve service.
Right, and we can't forget about those external factors we talked about earlier, like economic volatility and geopolitical risks.
Right. And the threat of labor disruptions always looms.
Yeah, those are all things investors have to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
But overall, it sounds like CN is in a pretty strong position.
Yeah, I think so.
Diversified business model, a clear focus on efficiency and growth, and they're being strategic about how they allocate capital.
They are.
But I have a feeling there's still more to this story. What else can we glean from this report about the factors that will shape CN's future?
Well, one crucial aspect we haven't really touched on yet is their focus on sustainability.
Okay, sustainability.
Yeah, in today's world, environmental responsibility isn't just a nice to have. It's
Right.
a business imperative.
It is. That's a really great point. So how is CN approaching this? What kind of initiatives are they undertaking?
Well, this particular report doesn't dive too deeply into their specific sustainability programs,
Okay.
but it does highlight their commitment to managing their environmental footprint.
Okay.
They're investing in fuel-saving technologies, exploring alternative fuels, and working to reduce their overall emissions.
That makes sense. The rail industry plays a huge role in reducing transportation-related emissions. I mean, moving freight by rail is way more fuel efficient than trucking.
Oh, absolutely. And CN has been recognized for their efforts in this area.
Oh, cool.
They've set some ambitious targets for reducing their carbon footprint and improving their overall environmental performance.
So they're taking a proactive approach, recognizing that sustainability is not just the right thing to do, it's also good business.
It is. Investors and customers are increasingly looking for companies that are committed to environmental responsibility.
Right. And for CN, which relies on natural resources and operates within communities across the continent, it's essential for their long-term success.
Absolutely.
So they're taking steps to minimize their environmental impact while also positioning themselves as a leader in sustainable transportation.
Right.
Are there any other internal factors that could influence CN's performance in the years ahead?
Well, one thing they highlight in the report is the ongoing need to attract and retain top talent.
Okay, tell.
Yeah, the rail industry, like many others, is facing a skilled labor shortage.
Right.
And CN needs to make sure that they can find and keep the best employees to maintain their competitive edge.
It's one thing to have the plans, but you need skilled people to actually execute on them.
Exactly.
So what are they doing to address this challenge?
Well, they're investing in employee training and development programs,
Okay.
offering competitive compensation packages, and creating a work environment that fosters career growth and advancement.
Okay.
They're also focused on building a more diverse and inclusive workforce, recognizing that talent comes from all walks of life.
So it's all about creating a company culture that attracts and retains the best and the brightest.
It is, and it's also about more than just filling positions.
Right.
It's about having the right people with the right skills at the right time.
Got it.
And this actually goes back to their focus on plan discipline and right-sized resources.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about having enough employees. It's about having that right mix of skills and experience to meet the evolving needs of the business.
Yeah.
It's about anticipating those future challenges and preparing their workforce to adapt and excel in new environments.
That's a great point. So we've got a company that's focused on operational efficiency, strategic investments, shareholder returns, environmental sustainability, and developing their workforce.
Right.
It's a really holistic approach to business.
It is.
They're recognizing that success depends on getting all of these elements right.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else we should consider?
Well, one thing that stands out to me is their emphasis on stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
They're not just focused on their own internal operations. They're also actively engaging with communities along their rail lines, building partnerships and addressing concerns.
That's interesting. Why is that so important for a company like CN?
Well, think about it. Their rail network stretches across thousands of miles and passes through countless towns and cities. So their operations have a direct impact on those communities.
Right.
So it's crucial to build positive relationships and address any issues proactively.
Okay.
It's about being a good neighbor and demonstrating that they're not just passing through, they're invested in the well-being of those communities.
So it sounds like they're taking a long-term view,
Right.
recognizing that their success is really intertwined with the success of the communities they serve.
Exactly. And that's a really important takeaway from this report.
Okay.
CN isn't just focused on maximizing profits in the short term.
Uh-huh.
They're building a company that is sustainable, responsible, and deeply integrated into the fabric of North American society.
That's a great perspective.
Thanks.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've explored CN's financial performance, their strategic initiatives, their revenue breakdown, their focus on sustainability, their efforts to develop their workforce, their commitment to stakeholder engagement.
It's a complex story.
It's fascinating. Is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind as they continue to follow CN's journey?
Well, I think the key takeaway here is that CN is a company that's constantly evolving and adapting to those changing market conditions.
Yeah.
And they're investing in their future. They're not afraid to embrace innovation, challenge the status quo, and make bold decisions to set themselves up for the long term.
What's the one question you'd like to leave our listener with, something to ponder as they continue to explore CN's story?
Well, given their focus on resource alignment efficiency and technological innovation, how might advancements in automation and AI reshape the rail industry in the coming years?
That's a great question.
How will CN leverage these technologies to further enhance their operations, improve safety, and create a more sustainable future for rail transportation?
It's a huge question.
It is.
And it's clear that the rail industry is on the cusp of some major transformation.
It is.
And CN is right there at the forefront.
Yeah. It really is amazing to think about how technology will continue to reshape an industry that's already so, physically ingrained in our world.
Right.
Massive locomotives, sprawling rail networks, the movement of goods that are so essential to our everyday lives.
Yeah.
It's not your typical tech startup disrupting things from a, digital platform.
It's a different kind of disruption for
Yeah.
sure. It's happening on a grander scale, literally.
Yeah.
And it requires a company like CN to balance, that tradition of physical infrastructure with the constant evolution of digital technology.
Right. And speaking of tradition, I'm kind of curious about CN's history.
Yeah.
They've been around for over a century, right?
Right.
How has their role in the North American economy evolved over time? Well, CN's history is really intertwined with the development of Canada itself.
Okay.
So they were formed in 1922
Sorry.
through a merger of several smaller railways,
Okay.
and they played a crucial role in connecting the vast expanses of the country, facilitating trade, and enabling economic growth.
Right.
Over the decades, they've expanded their network, acquired other rail lines, and become a truly continental player connecting Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
So they've gone from this, like, nation-building project to a continental powerhouse.
Right.
That's quite a legacy.
It is.
How have they managed to stay competitive for so long in such a dynamic industry?
You know, it's a real testament to their ability to adapt and innovate.
Yeah.
They've consistently invested in their infrastructure, upgrading their fleet, and embracing new technologies to improve efficiency and service. They've also been very strategic in their acquisitions and partnerships, expanding their reach and diversifying their operations. And they've navigated the ups and downs of the economic cycles, always looking for ways to create value for their customers and shareholders.
It's like they have this institutional knowledge, this deep understanding of the rail industry and its role in the broader economy.
Right.
That allows them to kind of anticipate changes and stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. They're not just reacting to trends, they're shaping them.
Yeah.
Which is a really powerful position to be in.
It is. So as we wrap up our deep dive into CN, what are the key takeaways you want our listener to remember? What's the essence of the CN story?
Well, I think it boils down to the CN is a company that understands its role in the world.
Okay.
They're not just moving goods from point A to point B. They're facilitating commerce. They're connecting communities.
Yeah.
And they're enabling economic growth on a continental scale.
Right.
It's a company that's grounded in tradition, but always looking ahead, embracing innovation, and constantly striving to create a better future for their employees, their customers, and the communities they serve.
That's a great way to sum it up. They're more than just a rail company.
Right.
They're a vital part of the North American economy.
Yeah.
And their story is a testament to the power of vision, innovation, and resilience.
And we can't forget about the human element.
Right.
You know, behind all the numbers, the financial reports, the strategic initiatives,
Yeah.
there are thousands of dedicated employees that keep those trains running, maintain the tracks, manage the logistics, and make sure goods get delivered safely and efficiently.
Right. It's their hard work and dedication that makes all of this possible.
It is.
It's a good reminder that even in a technology-driven industry, it's the people who make the difference.
Well said.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From their financial performance and strategic initiatives to their history, their role in the economy, their sustainability efforts, and the importance of their workforce.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has been, and I hope our listener has gained a much deeper understanding of this complex and dynamic company.
I hope so too. It's been a real pleasure diving into this with you.
Likewise. And to our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring CN's story. You keep asking those questions and stay curious about the world around you. Until next time, keep those knowledge gears turning.